right, welcome back to the Goat Rodeo. I'm Dave Caudle, standing in for Garrett Smith as he does CEO things. I'm joined by my colleagues Simon Coon and Chris Booth. We all work at a company called Reveal Technology. We talk about geopolitics and where technology meets national security. Welcome back, Chris Booth. We asked for you to come back and join us again because from your storied career in the Central Intelligence Agency, I have an assumption that you're best positioned and experienced to talk about the newsreel this week. Slow week. Um,
Yeah.
I'm hoping maybe you can cut through some of the news cycle a bit and start us off by describing this.
So yeah, just Iran. Nothing going on there. I spent about 2 decades at CIA, and Iran was the primary topic that I worked on, or adjacent topics like the Houthis, Shia militants, Hezbollah. So yeah, in some ways, this is pretty cool to have this going on right now, because usually it's like the China and the Russia experts that are getting attention. And I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I would say as well that if anybody tells you how this is going to go, they don't know what they're talking about, because I think it's an extremely opaque uh, situation, not only militarily, but what's going on in Iran and who the key players are. I think we've obviously killed many of the senior leadership figures.
Yeah. Good
Um,
Lord.
but I also
We tore
think
through
that,
them like paper.
yeah, and there's some pretty interesting background on maybe how some of that was done that's already coming public. But I think they did have plans for successions, and I think that you know there is a sophisticated internal security system in a combination of the besieged, which are sort of your thugs that go around and beat people up, and MOIS, which is the security intelligence service, which is really good at like counterintelligence. And IRGC is who gets all the attention, but they're generally more outward facing. I think, they just went through a wave of repression that killed maybe between 6 and 30,000 people. The New York Times had some interesting reporting where they had doctors that shared some of the x-rays with them, and people were shot in the face from a few feet away with shotgun pellets. I mean, the willingness, they had a 7-year-old who'd gotten shot. They don't care. And I think that the fact that you're willing to turn your own guns on unarmed civilians less than a month ago gives you an idea of the degree of ruthlessness that these people have. But then another factor with that is, kind of like in Syria, they know that there's not going to be any forgiveness. If they just say, hey, let's lay down our arms, it's all good, there are a lot of people that are going to be coming after them and their families. So it's almost like they're invested at this point where, they have to fight. Sadly, there's not generally a good record of changing a regime from bombing, or B, having like Jeffersonian Democrats take over in a revolutionary situation. The Israelis never called it the Arab Spring; they always called it the regional turmoil. And looking at that, I don't think there are too many bright successes from that. Libya is probably the closest analogy to maybe what we're trying to do in Iran, and I wouldn't say that that's been a success. Uh,
So
typically,
what do you think they would call this? Are they calling it Epic Fury 2? Because I candidly cannot imagine a scenario where this becomes a bright success. I know that the West in particular is concerned about Iranian funding of terrorism and all the destabilizing effects that they have. But what does the power vacuum get us? Right? Does Hezbollah and Venezuela shut down now, or do they just go do whatever they want in the absence of a guiding hand?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess in some ways it comes down to what are the people around Netanyahu telling him? Is it better to have like a fractured Iran that may have, elements of the security state that are keeping things together, but maybe other parts are breaking off? If things break off, is that good? I mean, in some ways, like they were big supporters of keeping Assad in power because they were worried what that power vacuum would look like. But say, I mean, Iran is only 50 to 60% Persian, and the rest are a group of pretty disparate minorities, ranging from like Turkmen to Arabs to Kurds. If the Kurdish region starts to break off, I mean, there's always a focus in Iraqi Kurdistan of kind of trying to, you know, grow into the Iranian part. There's a lot of, longstanding ties, smuggling networks, etc. But does that create, a goal for the Syrian Kurds as well, which is going to draw the Turks in? So I don't know. There's the Turks certainly don't want to have like a unified Kurdistan, right? So to what extent
That's actually
is
a
Israel
really
interested?
interesting thread because I know there was a clip going around of the former Israeli prime minister talking about how Turkey is the new Iran, right? That's their next biggest existential threat, and I don't know the particulars of how he came to that conclusion, but the commonality of a lot of this stuff seems to be that the Kurds get a lot of opportunity in this trade space, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a bit much to say that Erdogan is, creating the next Iran. I mean, he is an autocrat, but he's also on the backside probably of his rule. He may not even stay in power depending on the elections. And he is old. He certainly is interested in kind of creating a new Ottoman Empire, and he's made a lot of poor choices that seem to be just because he's trying to whatever, be the leading caliph for the Sunnis, and that has gotten him in trouble in a lot of his military adventurism. But I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that he is creating a new Iran. But I would say, just to answer your question, at the end of the day, I don't know what Israel's goals are, but I don't think you can divorce it from Netanyahu's political aims, right? Because he sees himself as like the state of Israel, but he's also interested in keeping wars going because then he doesn't have to face a reckoning on October 7th, which was a
Mm.
massive disaster on his part. And he's heading into elections, and if they're at war or have just come out of a successful, operation against Iran, that probably helps him stay in power. And the goal of staying in power is he doesn't want to go to jail, because in Israel they actually do put people in jail. Some of his predecessors have, been successfully prosecuted. So you cannot divorce the political goals that he has from, the military aims. And I think that, that's still causing dissension in Israel, and I think the Israelis are tired too. I mean, a lot of the people that have been doing all the fighting are the secular Israelis who do all their military service and have been, in Gaza for 2 years. But the primary supporters, or many of the primary supporters for Netanyahu, are the Orthodox who don't serve, who have 12 kids, who don't pay taxes because they're not making any money, basically,
They don't
but
work.
are,
Yeah.
yeah, and if they work, they have their wife, do the work at like a dry cleaners, but they're pushing, the politics in a more extreme position. And so they outvote the people that are actually serving and getting shot and, having their kids serve in these places. So there's a lot of dynamics there, but I don't see that Israel is going to stop until they've achieved whatever it is that their goal is. But I think we have we have similar but not identical aims maybe to the Israelis. And if there is down the road a break from where America wants to go versus Israel, I mean, that's certainly possible.
So speaking to these like outside influences, we've all been watching the news. We've seen the American strikes, we've seen the Israeli strikes. We've also seen a lot of these Iranian response strikes that seem to be just hitting random Arab civilian targets. What is the goal here? What does attacking the Dubai airport do in the conflict? I can't figure out the intent, and I'm much more interested, obviously, in like what the actual response is. But like, what were they hoping to get, and what do you think these
Well, I
other
think
Arab states are going to do in response?
I think, Israel is seen as the prime mover for an attack against Iran, but don't forget that they, going back to 1979, have had conflict with Saudi Arabia, right? And the UAE is a close second, really, in terms of promoting to the U.S. the idea that they need a regime change. And, I was talking to somebody who was on the NSC and was being told basically that in advance of this, that the Saudis as well as the Emiratis were lobbying the Trump administration to take out the Iranian government in addition to Israel. And Israel's been telegraphing it since Netanyahu came at the beginning of the year or in December to Mar-a-Lago that this is what he's been wanting to do. So on one hand, I think Iran is lashing back against people that they see as responsible for the attack. But they're also trying to create some chaos. If they can sit there and hit any U.S. Forces in some of these locations, that's something they want to do. And you can see right now that like closing the Dubai airport is having a big impact on, regional transport because it's the hub, along with Doha, for Europe to Asian traffic. And if you can cut that off, you're eventually going to sit there and cause some economic impact that maybe gets other people to weigh in about like, hey, we should call this off, right? So I think Iran's goal in many ways is to raise the pain threshold as much as possible. If they can create some US casualties, cause economic chaos, impact the stock markets, impact, the oil prices. Maybe enough people sit there and, come to President Trump and say, hey, like, we need to do something because this is starting to impact, the global economy. So I think that's it. But I also think that there has been a lot of decapitation of the leadership structure, right? So I think they did probably pass down authority to a lot of the individual units to fire as possible, but they've also attrited a lot of the missile systems, et cetera. So you're getting some of these onesie twosies, and their stocks were also limited by the last attack that the Israelis had, last year. So they really haven't been able to reconstitute everything. So maybe they can only get away with pinpricks, and that's kind of what they're trying for.
So if the objective for Iran is to, I guess what you're saying is change the cost equation of U.S. power projection in the region, or something to that effect, what does victory look like for Uncle Sam here? I realize that's a complicated question. Like, what is
It's a
the
great question. What are we hoping to get here?
well, I mean, is it obviously prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, protect global shipping in the straits? Like, what, Chris? What is best case scenario for Uncle Sam coming out of this conflict?
I almost want to turn it over to Simon, right? I mean, because like the CIA doesn't make policy. We just, provide the best information to policymakers to make a decision. Although,
So
funny, Claire
everybody
George,
makes policy.
well, everybody maybe it
Everybody.
does,
If
but
you are hurting people abroad in any capacity, you're a policymaker. And I think people forget this, even for like lance corporals in the military. Marines in Pakistan shooting rioters is a political act at the highest order, right? Like, and those are folks that are doing what they had to do in the situation they were put in. But I think this is the fear. Oh, this is my fear, is that we're sleepwalking into really heavy policy decisions that are going to get made de facto by people with boots on the ground in dangerous places who are going to just have to respond to the situation that they're in now. I don't know if you guys saw the clip from Eric Prince talking about whether or not this was in America's interest. But every time something happens, we got to get Eric Prince back on the news because we got to know what the Blackwater guy thinks. It's imperative.
I am so happy that Chris turned it back over to you, because I didn't really realize what a slam dunk Simon Coon is for this topic. It's munitions and Marines guarding embassies and drones in the Straits of Hormuz and Eric Prince.
Look, there's two versions. There's Simon, who cares about politics and America's standing in the world, of course, but there's also Simon the Marine, who thinks that the coolest thing that could ever happen is to be trapped in a consulate with 40 of your buddies and be like, hey, everyone's cleared to fire back now. It's you versus the whole town. That sounds awesome.
As long as it doesn't look like a Black Hawk Down scenario.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't go sideways.
Like,
somehow, that was an interesting piece of that, right? Because the Marines killed like 10 Pakistanis at least, and it just kind of ended.
Well, that's the thing.
Right?
I
like
mean,
the whole city
cases
didn't come torch them is kind of crazy.
I mean, that's why they don't let them shoot half the time. I mean, like,
Mhm.
you've never seen them fire on rioters or protesters like in the green zone in Baghdad,
Right.
right? Because there have been, times when there's thousands of people out there and you're going to
Right.
run out of
If
ammo,
everybody
right? And
shows
then they're
out,
going to come
you're
beat you to
stuck.
death if they're able to
Right.
breach it.
I wonder if they've evacuated that consulate. I haven't seen any like further news about the consulate since those initial riots and
Well,
stuff.
it's hard to
I don't think it
evacuate
was-
stuff when all the airlines are not flying in many of these areas right now. You know?
Well, we say that, but I also feel
I don't
like
think it was a. There wasn't an
American
actual
planes.
breach, right? And we were sending the 82nd to come help the Marines. I'm pretty sure.
So I had
right?
heard that it was close to a breach and didn't go that way. But I also feel like, yeah, if those Marines get like trapped, yeah, we're gonna go crack open an airfield right there in the center of town. Yeah,
Well, let's go
I
back
think about
to
that too. 'Cause,
Tehran
I mean,
in
like
1979.
when you were talking about,
Nobody shot the people that were coming over the wall in the embassy there because
Sure.
there were just too many of them, right? So,
and like that is God, it's almost like the weird original sin of this whole conversation, because not only
Yeah.
did it set like the political conditions, but also like the structure of the American military is based entirely now on that event. Like so much of the assets that we use and so much of the way the joint force operates is just the results of, boy, that really went sideways. We need to make sure we never let that happen again. And I like that. That's why I think that consulate's so interesting. And I haven't seen follow-up news, like I said, because what do you do if you're already at the point where you're letting Marines just free fire into a crowd in order to disperse it? You need to get them out of there. Like this is an untenable situation for
Well, I
50
think
Americans.
I think I saw something a day or so ago about like rules of engagement aren't a thing anymore. So maybe, they just gave them that authority on their own. But
That was the name of the movie about this. From
and then they're going to send Sam Jackson and Tommy Lee Jones, and it's going to
Yeah.
get really out of hand.
Can I just say, talking about some of these different individual incidents that we see going on, I thought it was interesting about the Kuwaitis may have shot down 3 of our F-15s, which I guess is a good advertisement for our interceptors, maybe less good on our countermeasures for those aircraft. So that's $93 million right there. But yeah, I think we're going to see some of these, small news stories that disappear fairly quickly, but are just interesting.
So they are evacuating all non-emergency staff from the consulates in Pakistan, but they're not changing the posture of the embassy in Islamabad. It's really interesting.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a natural friction point because there's a very small number of Shia in Pakistan,
Sure.
and we actually are kind of getting along with the Pakistanis lately.
Yeah, they're going to war with Taliban.
Yeah, well, they're going to war with the Taliban, and I guess the chief of the army came and got treated like he was a presidential level visit to the White House. I think basically it's a army that has a country, and so I think they can tamp that kind of thing down if they want to.
Sure, absolutely. So we're certainly not in short supply of conflict at the moment, which brings me to one of my favorite topics, which is how are we going to pay for this? We got jets falling out of the sky. We're deploying we've got 60% of American like sea and air power sitting in what seems like 10 square miles.
Be prepared to roll your eyes. Be prepared to roll your eyes, Simon.
Yeah.
Cheaper munitions. Cheaper munitions.
I'm not sure you can physically make them. This is my big thing now. We're seeing all these defense tech companies of every stripe for every solution. And now there's several new rocket motor companies. And I know of 4 new companies that make a 155 round of some kind. And my brain just goes to, if you could make more 155s, General Dynamics would be doing it, right? Like there's bottlenecks there that are not a lack of money and a lack of willingness. The bottlenecks are like lack of energetic chemicals in the supply chain that you can get your hands on en masse. So we have this conversation like, oh, we need cheaper munitions. I'm like, are you sure? Because I'm willing to bet if you flex that muscle, you're going to find out there's not enough stuff to make those munitions. That's my guess anyway. Unless you take the big munitions and break them into lots of little baby munitions, I don't know, maybe that's in the move.
Yeah, I mean, I think we
Okay.
need to have like a policy maybe for, industrial infrastructure. I think there's like one factory in Tennessee that makes black powder that you need to be able to initiate most of these things. And they had a big fire a couple months ago. So, and it dates to the 1940s. Some of it is probably as simple as like OSHA and other kind of permitting, right? No one wants to sit there and have a whatever explosives factory in their town or in their town outskirts. But you're right, like that's going to be a bottleneck. I think we're still importing in Europe is too a lot of stuff from China in terms of
Massively.
explosive, right?
In,
So
in terms of everything, for the record, like even we've only ever we banned what drone parts, and then we put tariffs on stuff. Have you considered all of the medical supplies that come to us from China? Have you there's dozens of industries that we don't think of as defense that would be crippling if we lost access to those supply chains. And all of this touches each other if you really pull that trigger, right? Like if Iran made anything of note, you can guarantee we would have lost access to it right now, right? Like that would be over across the board. There would not be exceptions because they really want America to buy X or Y thing for economic reasons. It would be all cut off. And in any kind of China conflict scenario, you got to assume that everything's going to get cut off. And I that's the places that it's going to hit. It's not going to be like, oh shit, we don't have access to Chinese germanium anymore. How are we going to make these lenses? It's going to be like, oh shit, no t-shirts are coming into the country. Like all of a sudden, all of the clothes stopped arriving. We didn't
what
think
would we
about
ever
that. How
do
do
in
we get
America, right?
clothes? Yeah. But there's thousands of products that we haven't even thought of. It just seems it's so flippant to discuss this idea of a hot war with China all the time. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not as easy as apparently killing the Ayatollah.
So,
It's
so as always, to bring it from high level strategy back down to something we can touch and feel. Um, the one-way attack UAS systems are having their day right now, are they not? I mean, yes, Tomahawk cruise missiles. I understand. Like we're talking about a different class of munitions,
I go
but
both ways on this one. I love that we're going
but
into it though.
but
I feel
UAE, by their reporting, believes they've been hit by almost 1,000 Shahed drones at this
okay.
point, right? And it's
Sure.
possible. I don't know, and we might get better reporting soon. It's possible the American service members that have been killed in this conflict so far were killed by a Shahed.
So here's the question then. You've had what, half a dozen American service members killed so far? Something like that
Yeah.
total?
Yeah.
You've had 1,000 Shaheeds launched. What's the actual effect?
And what's the effect of the Locust system?
And the Lucas system.
I'm sorry,
which is
Lucas.
the the American essentially Shaheed clone, which is another funny story as far as I'm concerned as it relates to defense tech, because it's, as has been reported, the company that makes the Lucas is a company called SpectreWorks. And they've built hundreds and hundreds of Lucas systems, have gotten them into the arsenal, and they've done it without any venture funding, and they haven't had to do any squirrely. They did use an AppFit. I take it back. They had the AppFit program, and they discussed that publicly as well about how AppFit helped them really scale production of the Lucas drone. But otherwise, it's a pretty conventional. It's a Group 3, right? We're not using a bunch of Group 1s and Group 2s to do something clever. These are big Group 3 drones in the hundreds being launched and used. And I think that's the question I'm most interested in is what has been the actual impact. And I would be willing to bet without even looking that the American Lucas drones are producing many more casualties than the Iranian Shahed drones, because it's not as simple as, oh, I have a cheap munition and it's one way, I'm going to send it all out there. Targeting matters, intel matters, planning matters, the joint force matters, all of that stuff. And there's this fantasy world that we're going to go to war with these guys and they're going to have quadcopters and they're going to smoke us. And I'm like, they're going to be real sad when they find out that Rangers are still really good at Ranger stuff. and every American munition operates on like a level of precision and violence that's just a different tier.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Lucas thing is funny because apparently it also had the effect of confusing, whatever existing Iranian air defense there was for a while because it looked like their own drones coming back. But I think Dave makes a point about what the ROI is, right? I mean, yeah, okay, 1,000 drones have hit Dubai. What's the cost? I mean, I think they're around $30,000 a piece. What's
Yeah,
a,
the Lucas
pack
ones are. I
three?
don't know how much a Shahid costs.
Yes.
Yeah, but what's like a
So for one tomahawk, you can get 60 Lucas systems.
It's pretty good.
right, or what's a Pac 3, Patriot missile, like $3 million, right? I mean, they're not using them against Shaheeds all the time, but that comes down to be the big issue. I mean, I think Simon wants to talk some about munitions in general, but our stockpiles are getting attrited, asymmetrically, right? The Houthis, the 2 month or slightly less than 2 month war or battle that we had with them last summer nearly depleted Navy stocks. They had some, destroyers that were Winchester that they said they hadn't had conflict like that since World War II. And it's certainly
Talk about an ROI, dude. We sure showed the Houthis.
yeah, because they're
Good.
still there, right? I mean, that's the thing too. So
Nothing
that's a
has
good
changed.
example of that's a good example though, right? Like, so we are an order of magnitude higher in terms of what we're doing to Iran, but the Houthis still seem to be there, and I would say at best it's a draw after we, spent several $billions trying to bomb them back into the Stone Age. They just
Well,
picked their
when all
flip
you got's a
flops back
hammer.
up and put the cot back in their mouth, and they were right back at it.
Yeah, I mean, the Houthi thing in particular was just a crazy level of hubris on our part. Because if you think you're gonna like track down this very dispersed and like entrenched enemy force by strikes alone, you're not gonna put anyone on the ground. You're not gonna do any of that like sticky work. Yeah, of course, your results are gonna suck. You you used a sledgehammer to do gardening. Like, good job, awesome. Uh, the flip side of it is those same weapon systems are extremely useful in the kind of operation we're doing right now. Like, yeah, I'm fighting a big hardened enemy with planes all over the ground. Go blow them up. Like that's where these tools really shine. But it doesn't seem well. Sometimes it seems like we don't know how to select the right tool for the job. We always end up just being like, that's what we've got. Send an aircraft carrier. Like, it's always send an aircraft carrier, no matter what the problem set is. If like, we think about the impact we would have had on the Houthis if we just sent a bunch of Rangers. It would have been way,
Yeah,
it would have
although
been, it would
yeah,
have got hairy.
That's always
Yeah.
that's always the right tool.
I
Just to be
think
clear, that is
that's a
always
tool
the
that
right
would have made
tool.
a lot more sense for that
I
particular
don't know. I
problem
mean, I
set.
remember in the first Trump administration, at the beginning of the administration, they sent the SEALs in. It was actually against an Al Qaeda target, but the JSOC commander said it was one of the top 10 gunfights JSOC had ever been in, and they didn't even make it into the building. And that's where one of the SEALs got killed, and they had to destroy an Osprey on the ground, and they exfilled out of there. So Uh, the memorable line from President Trump was like, "And the generals lost Ryan," right? So, I think it was a 4-hour attempt to get into a compound that wound up being a failure. I don't think that the Al Qaeda guys, AQAP, are any different than the Houthis. Some of it's the terrain and it's the same people. It's just that in some cases, they've picked a different side. So I don't think it's necessarily a given that if we went in the ground in Yemen that we would have better outcomes. And I hope that we're not really planning on doing that kind of thing in Iran, particularly because despite our conversation, I don't think anyone's ever answered at this point, like, what are our goals? What's America getting out of this? How do we know when we've won? What does success look like? How long is this going to go? I think there are going to be continued, negative effects. Like, it looks like we're threatening Spain right now because they weren't letting us use their airfields. There's just a bunch of potential bad spillover effects from this.
And so, like, I mean, I hate to beat this example to death, but what we wanted from the Houthis was pretty clear: stop shooting at the boats. And a bunch of violent Americans in your compound will stop you from shooting at the boats. Like, it's the cost is the higher problem there, I think, more so because I mean, yes, we've had challenging post GWAT raids, but we've also had things like the Maduro raid in Venezuela, so that the tools exist to do this at a very high level. I actually don't think what I would have wanted against the Houthis is a terribly high level version. I actually want a much more blunt instrument, violent version, because I think 2,000 Army Rangers sends a very different message than like a SEAL team raid. I think we're really bad. Like I said, we have one tool that we want to use in the Middle East, and it's sea and air power, and we really don't want to do anything else. And it's very clear to me that no one wants to be the guy who sends more American troops back there to die and to get like bogged down again. Whereas we seemingly are much more willing to send troops into a country in South America. Like,
Well, I
feels like
think
on a whim almost.
there's a difference in culture too, right? I mean, and size, right? There's 90 million people in Iran. I'm not saying they're all going to sit there and defend the country, particularly because there's plenty that don't like the regime. But you look at their history and their culture, they took an 8-year war with the Iraqis that was involving poison gas and missiles every night into the cities, and they sat there and they took that. And I think that just the whole Shia culture, which is one of martyrdom, and basically being seen as the underdog, like that's very different from your Latin American guy who maybe wants to go party this weekend versus, the devout Shia who's like, my greatest goal is to be a martyr and be killed by the Americans defending my country. So, does that mean that they're all going to fight to the last person? I don't know, but I think that it's a tougher culture maybe than, going into some of these places in Latin America.
See, Simon, I'm actually amazed that we have not made it to, other than like don't touch our boats. Other than don't touch our boats, I'm amazed we haven't made it to the Straits of Hormuz because you bring this up all the time. I and all eyes are on that. What you consistently remind me is a very small,
Yeah.
a very small piece of terrain. What's what are your thoughts on this on the straits right now?
I mean, I think there's some real questions about what's your intent, and the Houthis are a great instructive example there, because the Houthis had a very clear intent in a tool that was well suited to the job. How can I just be disruptive? Generally, you just need to hold this place at some level of risk. Any level of risk is good because that costs you money. I don't actually have to sink anything. I don't have to do that. I just have to launch enough stuff to keep you watching. And that's not what Iran needs to do right now, right? Like Iran is fighting for its life, and it's like entirely decapitated. So finding like clear strategic direction from the current Iranian regime, I think, is going to be really challenging. What I think is more um, potentially scary to me is if it starts to balkanize, even just like internally government wise, and the IRGC or any of these other security force camps start making their own policies and their own directions, you could easily see the Iranian Navy going, okay, well, we're going to go do this because we think this is the best course of action. And that could involve the Straits pretty aggressively.
Well,
The
so
flip side, the
I
flip
I
side is, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, Chris.
I was gonna say there isn't an Iranian Navy anymore, according to the US Navy. That's also an
Sure. Yeah.
impact, right? They're saying they
See,
basically have destroyed all the vessels, and there was a destroyer that reportedly was sunk by a submarine near Sri Lanka, and the Sri Lankans have recovered like 32 shipwrecked Iranians from whatever the pride of their fleet, this destroyer that took part in Indian naval operations the other day. So there may be some limitations on their ability to do these kind of things, like mine, or have their swarm boats or any of those other things.
right. The Houthis also don't have a navy and figured out how to hold it at risk, right? So, like, it doesn't take a ton of tools. It just takes some clear-minded direction. But also, what the Houthis had at the time was the financial and material backing of Iran. The really who is the piggy bank that's going to uh, equip Iran to hold the straits, and that's an interesting logistical challenge, and I think that's what you're going to run into.
Yeah, I mean, I think though the Houthis have never been the full cat's paw of the Iranians. They're independent actors, and they've done a lot of stuff that Tehran didn't want them to do. And I think that even their own domestically produced weapon systems were enough, right? They had pretty sophisticated USVs, maybe similar to what Saronic is building, right, Simon? That they that they were attacking stuff with, as well as some
Do
of
we
the
know if any
missiles.
American USVs got utilized in Epic Fury?
It's a good question, but I do think that the Navy has been counting on for what, 40 years that they have to neutralize this. There's a good book, Twilight Wars, I think, by David Christ, that just talked about like how under Reagan we wiped out the Gulf, kind of an unacknowledged naval war. So there's a history of us recognizing, what if you remember the tanker wars during the Iran-Iraq war, these little cigarette boats that were running around and threatening oil tankers, and we took all that kind of infrastructure out. So there's a history and an understanding that this might be what Iran is going to do, and we just made sure they're not capable of doing it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The whole thing's fascinating, and I think the biggest problem now is like the unknowns. What happens next? And to what extent do we even have the appetite to continue to shape and invest in what happens next? Um, we had seen some of the news. Chris, you mentioned this earlier that we had kind of an idea about potential successors, who we then also struck and eliminated. Uh, so that's just not only is it a power vacuum, it's like a 10 layers deep power vacuum. And I don't think, regardless of what different reporting has been, that the Shah's family is about to come back into power. I would be shocked to see that outcome.
No, I mean, there are people who are saying, "Oh, they want a monarchy," but it's not like the Shah left on particularly good terms. That everyone was like, "Oh, things were so much better under the Shah," right? And it's a young country. Most people don't remember the Shah's times, so I think that he's more of an Ahmed Chalabi kind of guy. He hasn't been in his own country since the 70s. I can't imagine that he's going to have any kind of legitimacy. What are we gonna just parachute the guy in there? I think that's hey, he speaks good English and we can get a hold of him in Tehrangelis. So, let's just promote this guy as the solution, the savior. I think it's very unlikely that that's going to happen. I think you're going to most likely wind up with some kind of unsavory group of characters that is able to be ruthless enough to come to power. And let's even remember 1979, the Ayatollah kind of did a bait and switch. It wasn't like everybody's like, we want a totalitarian clerical state. I mean, a lot of people were communists, they were Democrat, they were whatever. And he, at least in the 6 months before he came to power, was saying, oh, yes, we're going to, do things democratically, etc. And the first government even had like a Democratic prime minister, and he lost his power over the embassy takeover. But there's always been different currents in the Iranian government and in the people for what they're looking for. But I don't think monarchy's it. I think the most ruthless people that are willing to, do whatever it takes to come to power are the ones that are probably going to wind up with power. And right now, you have seen the protesters willing to protest, but they don't have any weapons. They don't have any, control. Maybe you get like the Bazari class, which are like the merchant people that run a lot of the economy, to be an intermediary. But it's probably going to be somebody from the security state that winds up kind of controlling whatever it is there is to control. And I, I wouldn't say that there isn't the possibility that there are going to be some parts breaking off, or turmoil in some of the further regions, like the Arab area that is against Iraq, or the people down in Sistan and Baluchistan, the Baluch, who don't really want to be there either. Maybe have a greater Baluchistan with the Pakistanis, or join with Afghanistan. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, But these are all the kind of things that'd be great if somebody had a plan for.
Chris was just being very articulate about this conflict, tracing all the way back to the Iranian hostage crisis. And I could not pay attention because whatever happened in his background came across on this end as the opening to Can You Hear It Coming in the Air Tonight by Phil Collins.
Yeah,
Did you
his
also hear
phone.
that?
Yeah, yeah.
Did you hear that?
I don't.
Yeah,
I
I need
don't
to
think
actually.
that's
I,
not the
I need to
first time I
return
think
that
I've heard
call.
Chris's phone fire
That
off with Phil
sadly only
Collins.
happens when I'm recording a podcast, but that gives you an idea of of my age and a fundamental importance in my life is Miami Vice, which has shaped my whole worldview. So you know,
Shaped
Don
my whole
Johnson might be one
worldview.
of those people, and Philip Michael Thomas, of course, to the three people that you would have to a dinner. Because I mean, they've got to have some crazy stories about, Coke in the 80s and, film noir, Miami. I mean, it's
Chris, you're a career CIA guy. I promise you that your stories are as crazy as Don Johnson's. I don't think he did anything that's really that
oh,
groundbreaking.
I don't know. Don Johnson, there's some there's some stories
But like,
about him partying in the 80s.
yeah, but everyone was partying in the 80s. That's like the most common.
It's
That's
fair.
Miami is still that. That's still
true.
happening.
That's
What
true.
I'm much more interested in is how many times in the past 30 years has an American CIA employee of some stripe had Phil Collins playing dramatically on their phone while trying to do sensitive intelligence work?
Well,
I feel like that could be a
unlikely
real
because
derailing thing.
okay, no, I probably unlikely because generally we just don't have our phones with us. I mean, that's
Okay,
what's so
fair enough.
weird being like in the real world is like I've spent my whole career basically in a skiff, and so you don't have a phone in there. I mean, typically you're not supposed to have an Apple Watch or things like that in a situation room. I guess, those kind of things are being waived, but yeah, we generally don't have phones. And I will bring it back to something interesting that's relevant, right? The Financial Times had a good story the other day about how the Israelis may have planned their opt at the start of the war. Besides having taken over the cameras, the traffic cameras in Tehran, they were also focused on the phones of the drivers and the security staff that's around these senior leaders, because that is something that you just can't really get away with. Like if you're a senior leader, and this is, I mean, the terrorists have recognized this for a long time, you can get away with not having a phone. But the guys that are, driving you around and making sure you get where you need to go, those guys need to have comms. And so apparently the Israelis were focusing on, hey, this is the VIP parking lot where all these guys come together. So we know that there's a big meeting that's going on. And you know, I think that just kind of is that blending of the intelligence threat of, you can be tracked by your phone, and the military option of, hey, because you can be sensed, you can be struck, and that's what led this to it. So anyway,
We talked about this a little bit. I think it was before we actually started recording, but these technological capabilities that the U.S., I'm sure some of our allies have, that do not get pulled out unless absolutely necessary. And I think you saw some of them utilized in the raid on Maduro in Venezuela. But I am endlessly frustrated with this thread of conversation that we see where everyone thinks that Ukrainian drones are going to completely revolution, all things stopped. Guys figured out how to build $400 drones. And I'm like, that's fascinating. Have you ever considered everyone in your compound shitting their pants while you're trying to fight? Because there's some weird stuff that's out there that's going to like really change the way the stuff goes down. And we're holding it reserve. And I'm sure the Russians and the Chinese and everyone else and the Israelis are holding really fascinating technological leaps in reserve.
Operation Brown Note.
Exactly, right? Like it's just there's that it keeps going around, right? There's that interview with one of the guards that survived where he's just like describing the raid and the incomprehensible nature of it. And we did that on the world stage against Maduro, and then we didn't do it at all in this Iranian one, right? It was all like very meat and potatoes. Even the Group 3 Lucas drones like fit very neatly into the joint fires concept. That we're not really changing the playbook by any means there. So even this isn't exactly the pinnacle of how America could execute operations like this. It's kind of a classic version in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, you often not until years later kind of hear about what happened, right? Like if you remember the
Sure.
opening days of the Gulf War, how they went in and took out the air defense. 160th did that. And similarly, there have been other things that, they're probably advanced forces that were already operating on the ground in some cases, and they're probably not going to sit there and talk about what they did or didn't do. And I think there are no doubt some things that have happened that we just haven't been told about yet. Like what's ever happened with those special Blackhawks that were used in the UBL
Mm.
raid, right? I mean, have we been deploying anything else? That's over 10 years ago. What new stealth kind of, high equity kind of tools have we been using for boutique specialized operations, which I'm sure they have conducted in this operation?
We're gonna have to wait a few years for that book, Chris, because this is not the service component that is famous for writing books immediately
Yeah.
following.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, can I thank you sincerely, Chris, for weighing in on this topic? Can we wrap up Iran and maybe move to Simon? What's going on Capitol Hill? Another thing that I don't understand.
Sure. Dude, where do you even start? This is the topic is too big to stick it at the end here. It'll be interesting to see how much of this actually affects the Hill. The Hill is going to vote on war powers this week, which, depending on who you listen to, may or may not even be a constitutional law. But the House is voting, I think, Thursday or Wednesday right now, and then it'll go over to the Senate. I think the odds of us passing any kind of war powers resolution that restricts the president has almost no chance of getting 2/3, which is what they would need to override a Trump veto. So it's a little bit of theater. Um, I've already seen statements from some of the senators, like Senator Kane, who are saying, it's important that we get people on the record about this. And so, what the real conversation is how does this affect midterms more than how is it going to affect the operations, right? I think where you stand as a politician on new engagements in the Middle East or just new foreign engagements, period, is going to impact what was already a very contentious midterm. DHS is still shut down. We're supposed to vote on reopening DHS this week as well. It's not going to happen. It's going to stay shut down. As far as I know, there hasn't been any progress on that topic. We just had several hundred elections last night, lots of primaries. We've seen some folks already go down. Dan Crenshaw lost his primary race. He's going to be out of the House next year. We're going to go to a runoff with the Texas Senate seats. So remains to be seen who will be the Republican nominee for Texas Senate, either Cornyn or Paxton. But James Talarico on the Dem side did win his primary. So Congress is up in the air. I think Congress is going to look extremely different after the midterms, and I think it's going to seriously impact what DoD operations look like, what the admin is able to do. There was conversations earlier this year about, are we going to do another reconciliation package to flow more money? I don't think it's physically possible. We now have to take up a supplemental appropriations package just to pay for all the stuff that we expended in this operation against Iran. We're going to burn a bunch of time on the floor, like I said, doing these war powers votes. We still haven't funded DHS, so we're going to have to find more floor time to deal with DHS. So, I don't see mechanically the time to do a new reconciliation package, which potentially calls into question Trump's ability to do a $1.5 trillion budget. It is chaos, to say the least. All eyes on midterms. That's how I see it. And I got to shout it out. One of my favorite congressmen, Ryan Zinke, just announced his retirement. So you're seeing even more retirements. Like the shape and face of the House is going to be different. I'd be interested to see actually at this point how this Congress stacks up for retirements all at once, compared to the historical highs. I feel like we're in a pretty significant territory for number of members retiring all in the same cycle.
Well,
not
thank you.
because of Iran, but just because it sucks to be in Congress. It's not a fun job, if anyone's wondering.
That'll be topic number 1 next week. Sucks to be in Congress.
Mhm.
As we're approaching, and thank you, Simon. We're approaching an hour here, guys, or almost at an hour. So I think it's time to wrap. I think this episode I learned Simon loves the Rangers. Chris loves Phil Collins. Don't touch our boats. We
Simon
don't like
does
that.
love the Rangers, for the record. That's true.
Simon loves the Rangers. Chris loves Phil Collins. Don't touch our boats. We don't like that. Are my takeaways. All right. Anybody need a last word, or is that it? All right. Wrap
No,
it.
thank you for
Thank you
having
both.
me. All right, see you
Thanks,
guys.
Chris.
I'm
Good to
sure there's
see
going
ya.
to be lots of good reasons to have you back, Chris. Fortunately.
Take care.